He didn't knock. He shoved the door, stared past my black funeral suit, and said, "Property reverts to blood family." In that one sentence, my wife's brother tried to erase 8 years of marriage, my name on the deed, even the coffee cup she left on the rack. By nightfall, they were pocketing a new lock set and eyeing the mirror I restored with my own hands. Grief turned into something colder, the kind of resolve that keeps receipts, calls a deputy, and lets a judge read a forged quitclaim out loud. This isn't a story about shouting. This is how a house survives betrayal with paper, patience, and a door that only opens for those who knock. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back, be part of the experience. If a moment grabs your attention, whether it's powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp of that scene and share your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments resonate with you the most. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. I woke to the long horn of a freighter feeling its way through fog, a sound that threaded our cedar walls and settled in my chest like a steady hand. The inn smelled of brine and yesterday's coffee, the kind Isabel said made the kitchen honest. I lay still and listened for the building's pulse. A house you've cared for answers back, soft ticks in the baseboards, a shy sigh under the stairs. Fog pressed low over the channel. I brewed coffee the way she liked it, pouring in a slow spiral until the bloom rose and fell. Steam filmed the window. Beyond it, the Columbia looked like tarnished pewter. On the counter, our wedding photo stood beside the brass bell. "One cup, same as always," I said, setting the mug where she used to sit. I rubbed a crescent of dust off the glass with my sleeve. I walked the lobby with a towel, chasing last night's rain from the planks. The reservation ledger waited open. I had crossed out 3 fall bookings and called each guest. Their replies sit in the margins now. "She poured tea when the wind howled," one wrote. Another, "Her gray glazes looked like the river." Condolences felt like proof the life happened. "Her pottery wheel waits by the north window." I lifted the plastic and found the last cylinder she threw, collaring toward a narrow throat. Clay remembers who held it. Faint ridges ran like fingerprints. She once told me clay dies of thirst faster than people do. I misted the surface, felt the cool speak back, and drew the cover down as if tucking in a child. List help. Check the sump pump. Email the linen service. Call the insurer about the studio rider. Verify the utility auto pay. Back up the office drive. Lock the trust binder in the bottom file drawer. Movement steadied me more than sleep. "Not today," I told the doorway. "Not yet." Grief in motion is a load you can shoulder. Grief at rest presses on the sternum. I hung our keys on the brass hook by the door, 3 rings that talk when you move them. The deadbolt turned with the easy slide of a habit maintained. Outside, gulls worked the pilings. In Astoria, news moves faster than tide. The neighborhood group had posted a candle for Isabel and photos from workshops. Retired birders in blue aprons, teenagers with lopsided bowls, a couple at 40 years toasting with mugs she stamped with a tiny anchor. I set the phone face down. On the reception desk, I laid out the woven shawl Anna once forgot, brown wool that smells of lavender and wood smoke. I folded it and placed it on the reading chair by the window, a gentle border between what is hers and what is mine. Family is arithmetic until it turns into language. Then every word can cut. I let a memory of Carlos drift by without inviting it to stay. One Thanksgiving, before hospitals and scans, he said something about land belonging to those whose names are oldest in the ground. I laughed then, believing the future was a paved road and not a rope bridge. This morning the line returned like a tide mark. My phone held a late voicemail from Liam. "I'll swing by after work," he said. We can talk logistics when you feel ready." The word logistics made him sound older, like a man trying on his father's coat. I replayed the message and kept my thumb away from call back. I toured the rooms as if a guest might arrive in bad weather. The upstairs hallway exhaled a salt chill where a window never quite seals. I straightened a chart of local lighthouses and tightened 2 screws that always wander. I made a note about lamp oil. In the office, I opened the bottom drawer and checked the binder, Revocable Living Trust, with both our names flagged by Julia's tabs. The papers made their flat sound when I thumbed them. I pictured Isabel's pen lifting, her wrist flexing, the small cluck she made when a signature sat exactly where it should. Back in the lobby, the shell chime moved twice, a touch you feel more than hear. I paused with my hand on the bell and listened the way you listen for a storm far offshore. The boards took my weight and answered with their dry music. I breathed the brine, the coffee, the faint trace of her hand cream that refuses to leave the air. "Okay," I told the room, "we keep the house steady." I added, "I hear you," because the habit of answering what can't answer back is hard to break. The horn sounded again out on the channel, longer now, a ship telling a truth the fog could not swallow. I squared the ledger and set the photo where the light could burnish the frame. Somewhere on the porch, a soft thud, not yet a knock, and the chime stitched one last note through the morning. Out at sea, storms send warnings before they make land. A wise innkeeper learns to listen. The first knock wasn't a request. It struck wood like a gavel, quick and certain, and then the door moved under another hand. The shell chime lifted once, a small shiver of glassy notes that said the air had changed. I was standing at the reception counter with the ledger open and the morning's towel still damp in my hand. A gust shouldered in, and with it Carlos Reyes and 2 of his sister's nephews, men with dockworker shoulders and new boots that squeaked on the planks. Carlos didn't remove his coat. He set his feet wide, finding courtroom posture in a lobby scented with coffee and salt. He wasn't loud. Authority doesn't always raise its voice. "Property reverts to blood family," he said, each noun a rung he climbed. "We'll manage the transition." The sentence walked the room and took a seat where Isabel once drank tea. I put the towel down and drew a breath that smelled of cedar and a faint trace of her hand cream. Transition in my house was changing linens between guests. His word meant something else. They moved with a plan that was not improvised. One nephew turned toward the studio corner and lifted the edge of plastic from the unfired pieces. The other drifted toward the antique mirror, the one I had repaired with careful dowels after a winter crack. I stepped between him and the frame, palms open, as if approaching a skittish animal. "The house is in mourning," I said. "Nothing leaves, and no hardware changes without documentation." Carlos gestured, and the nephew at the studio lowered the plastic with a put-upon sigh. The other man reached into his jacket and produced a retail blister pack, new brass that caught the window light, a fresh deadbolt and knob set. My eyes fixed there the way a diver fixes on a rope in current. Locks have their own grammar. They declare who a room obeys. "This is temporary," Carlos said, but he placed the words like sandbags. "We'll move you to the back guest room until we settle title. Anna can take the master. Liam will help me keep the inn running under the Reyes name." I thought of Isabel's handwriting on glaze jars, a small, neat script that treated every color as a neighbor worth knowing. Names can be stewardship or theft, depending on the hand that writes them. "You'll leave the lock set on the counter," I said, "and you'll write down any item you touch." The nephew looked to Carlos before setting the blister pack beside the bell with theatrical care. I picked up a pen and dated the top of a blank page. If men intend to dispute memory later, it helps to make one while the room still smells like morning. The door opened again, softer this time. Liam stepped in with damp hair and a knit cap in his hand, the boy and the man both visible in the way he changed weight from foot to foot. He hugged me. His shoulder trembled and then held. He glanced toward Carlos before speaking. We can talk logistics later, he said, about keeping it in the family line. The phrasing fit his mouth poorly, like a borrowed mouthguard. I wanted to ask which family he meant. Instead, I pointed to the coffee, still warm in the press. You can each have a cup, I said, while we sit and slow this down. Hospitality is not capitulation. Sometimes it is a break. I poured 3 mugs and placed them on the low table by the window. The nephews held theirs without drinking. Carlos did not reach for his. The steam rose, visible for a moment, in a shaft of gray light before it thinned. I called Julia from the desk phone and turned on speaker so my hands could write. I gave her the time, the number of people in the room, and what they had touched. She listened the way a good dockhand watches a line pay out, eyeing friction points. Document, don't argue, she said. Change nothing tonight. I'll be there first thing with the trust and survivorship papers. Keep the binder locked. Her voice was even. It steadied the chairs. I hung up and noted the call in a margin. The nephew closest to the mirror drifted again and then checked himself. I had not moved. Carlos studied the shawl on the chair by the window, Anna's wool folded into a neat, square quiet. He took in the respectful placement and disguised the recognition with a small sniff. Grief, when complicated, converts to etiquette. Bring whatever you believe supports your position, I said. I'll meet any legitimate document with ours. He straightened his cuffs, a practiced gesture. I'll return with paperwork, he answered, and a local attorney. The room tightened and released. He nodded at Liam, an invisible rope cast across the space. My son looked down at his cup. The silence between us said everything the words postponed. Outside, gulls argued over a floating scrap. Leave the lock set, I added. Carlos flicked 2 fingers at the blister pack as if it were beneath his attention. The nephews placed their cups untouched next to it. They filed out without the clatter they'd brought in. The shell chime offered a thin, unresolved note, and then nothing at all. I watched until their silhouettes disappeared past the porch rail into the marine light. I logged the items they had handled, the minutes they had occupied, the proposed actions they had declared. The act of writing put weight back into the boards under my feet. I opened the office cabinet, slid the trust binder deeper, and turned the key. From the north window, the river looked like worn metal. A ship's horn spoke somewhere in the fog, 3 measured notes, patient and directional. Liam lingered at the threshold, cap in his hands, his eyes landing anywhere that wasn't me. I could have reached for him and the hand would have been mine and Isabel's together. Instead, I kept both on the pin so that no one mistook tenderness for surrender. We'll talk, he said, and left before I could decide whether to nod. After the door settled, I picked up the new lock set, still sealed, and placed it in the drawer with the incident log. I returned Anna's shawl to the chair and smoothed the wool flat, an old man's small ceremony that felt like setting a plate for the absent. Then I stood alone in the lobby and listened for what the house might tell me next. It gave me the usual answer, creaks and breath, and a suggestion that order, once chosen, must be defended by ordinary means. I wrote the day's first entry in the log, underlined the date, and closed the book with the care one uses for a promise. Dawn showed up in layers, first a gray that thinned the house into outlines, then a pewter wash across the river, then a small brightness that found the mug rack one handle at a time. I set the kitchen table the way Isabel always preferred for hard conversations. Nothing fancy, just a carafe of coffee, a plate of plain shortbread, and the mug with the tiny anchor she stamped on the day we opened the inn. Beside it, I laid my incident log and a pen that writes without skittering. The table looked like a map. Things to cross, things to respect. Julia's car door clicked outside, efficient and light. She stepped in with the clean cotton smell of a dry office. Binder in one hand, a manila folder under her arm, rain on her shoulders turning to dots. She greeted the room like it was a witness, then set down her load in careful squares. The binder was fat with color tabs. Beneath the cover, a sheet read summary in 10-point type, polite as a church whisper. "We'll keep this factual," she said, voice even. She tapped the tabs in order: trust, deed, survivorship, operations. No arguments about motives. If they try to move anything, we note the time, the item, the person. Originals are off-site. These are certified copies. I poured her coffee. She did not touch the shortbread. We were still reviewing the summary when the front door opened without a knock. The shell chime gave one quick breath and stopped. Carlos came with the two nephews, sleeves already rolled, the manner of men starting a job and not asking what it pays. His eyes landed on the binder first, then on the anchor mug. Something like impatience crossed his face. "Our attorney is on standby," he announced. He did not sit. One nephew drifted toward a crate in the hall, lifting the lid with two fingers as if sampling fruit. The other scanned the walls the way buyers do before they learn a house is not for sale. "By law and by paperwork, everything waits," Julia said. She did not raise her voice. She opened the binder, slid out a copy of the recorded deed, and aligned it with the table's edge. This property was held as community property with right of survivorship. At Isabel's death, title vested in Tom. He is also the surviving trustee and beneficiary under their revocable trust. Carlos leaned in enough to cast a shadow over the dates. "Family property stays with family," he said, the syllables steady, as if he were laying stones across a creek. "Custom does not supersede recorded title," Julia replied. "Removing items without permission can constitute theft. Any interference with the trust's administration will be documented." She placed her index finger on a short paragraph in the summary. "There is an ethics clause regarding disparagement and obstruction. We prefer not to need it." I kept my hands flat on the log, feeling the table declare itself in the wood grain. The nephew with the crate made to lift a smaller box from within. "Lid on," I said, and wrote the time. The man looked to Carlos before lowering it. Footsteps sounded at the porch, and Liam appeared in the doorway, the cap in his fist, his hair damp from fog. He took in the binder, the anchor mug, the men around the table. He sat at the corner, where you can leave quickly if you decide to. His eyes found the mug and stayed there. "Morning," I said. It carried more freight than two syllables should. He nodded. "I'm here to listen." Julia inclined her head toward him as if acknowledging a junior colleague. "Today is present authority," she said gently. "Operations are Tom's. There will be time to discuss training." Carlos repositioned himself into the center of the room's gravity. "Here is a practical offer," he said. "Tom remains as caretaker. Reyes controls keys and safe until we agree on division." "No," Julia said, and the word made no noise beyond itself. She slid a page closer to him, survivorship language in bold. "Transfer already occurred. There is nothing interim to award." He stood straighter, as if taller might make the paper shorter. The nephew by the hall looked again toward the crate. The other drifted, hands empty, toward the counter where last night's lock set lay sealed. I had placed it there on purpose. When his fingers hovered, I let my chair make its small wooden warning. A knock sounded behind them, one, then two, followed by the door opening and a county deputy stepping inside, hat tucked under his arm to keep the drip off the floor. He smelled of wet nylon and the cold outside. "Just need names for a log," he said. He wasn't there to decide anything. His presence wrote the room into a different register. He took photos of the crate and the blister pack lock set, read the date from MIPO, and wrote an incident number on a card. "If something moves that shouldn't, call this," he added. He left without changing the temperature by a degree. Carlos watched the door close and adjusted his cuffs. He said he would return with paperwork, and that their side had located a deed that clarifies things. The word sat oddly, like a watch left on a windowsill, catching light it wasn't meant to. "We welcome any legitimate document," I said. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. Please deliver it in writing for counsel to review. Meanwhile, operations continue. No lock changes, no removals, and any entry requires notice. He considered the anchor on the mug again a small emblem that refused to apologize for existing. "We'll be back," he said. They withdrew in a line, nephews first, Carlos last. The chime stuttered once and fell still. Through the window, the river lifted into a wrinkle and then smoothed, like a breath released. I sat and wrote, letting the pen pace my lungs. Time of arrival, time of departure, names, attempted actions, deputy's number, summary of statements. The act turned adrenaline into ink. When I finished, I slid the incident card into a plastic sleeve, filed it behind the day's log, and returned the anchor mug to its place on the rack. I locked the binder and felt the tiny click in my thumb. Liam lingered as if caught in two currents. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at the hall where the crate sat whole. His face was his mother's when she decided a glaze needed one more pass at lower heat. "Stay for breakfast," I said. The sentence came out like a normal morning. He shook his head without disrespect. "I'll call you later," he managed. He stepped out, a draft following him like a dog. Julia gathered her pages, rechecked a tab, and breathed in before speaking. "We should pull county filings this afternoon," she said. He hinted at a deed. "If there's a recording, I want eyes on it." I nodded. The river had turned a shade darker, the shape it takes when weather is busy just beyond the visible. I wiped a dry ring off the table and straightened the shortbread plate, which no one had touched. The house, like a careful witness, had given only what it needed to. We would ask the rest from the records. A stranger's voice said, "Plan B," and the house went quiet. Curious what Plan B looks like up close. By afternoon, the river had darkened to shade the way water does when weather builds just beyond sight. I locked the binder, slid the incident card into my pocket, and followed Julia to her car. We drove the short run to the county building in a quiet that helped the mind keep its tools sharp. Hallways under fluorescent light have their own mercy. The clocks are honest, the floors know where they begin and end, and nobody argues with a date stamp. The recorder's lobby smelled like toner and damp coats. A red number dispenser clicked. We took a ticket we didn't need because public terminals were open. Julia woke a monitor, fingers steady on the keys. I read names from a note card so our spelling wouldn't drift. Reyes, Isabel, Keller, Thomas. The parcel number that has become a second address to me. Search results appeared with the indifference of any machine. One line sat where no line should have been. Quitclaim deed, 10 days prior, grinning with a document number like a serial on a found weapon. The execution date was after Isabel's death. My mouth dried as if I'd swallowed beach sand. Julia leaned closer until the screen lifted a pale wash across her face. She didn't swear. She wrote the number on her pad as a nurse writes a pulse. "We request a certified copy," she said, already standing. At the counter, the clerk moved with the patient speed of a person who lives all day inside rules. He read the number back carefully, finished a form, and disappeared behind a half door. 10 minutes, he said when he returned. "There'll be a red stamp and a raised seal." That's what the court wants. We sat at a side table beneath a bulletin board covered with lost pet notices and a poster about open government. The clerk brought the packet, 3 pages stapled, red seal blinking like a small wound. Julia laid it flat and took out a highlighter. The execution date went yellow, the notary commission number went green. The office address under the notary's name looked familiar in the wrong way. It belonged to a storefront I remembered as dark for months. Julia compared the signature to a photocopy of Isabel's bank card. My wife's hand made a firm, right-leaning loop on the S and a modest tail on the Z. The deed's Isabel meandered like someone tracing over a window. The vertical rhythm was wrong, the pressure timid where hers had always been sure. Julia called the notary unit at the Secretary of State, introduced herself, and read the commission number twice. She wrote the agent's name, then, with her pencil still on the pad, she nodded without smiling. "No record of that commission," she said after ending the call. She underlined her note. "We have enough for a temporary restraining order." Back at the car, she opened her laptop on the armrest like a field desk. I drove us to the inn where the kitchen table had become a courtroom again. Julia typed with a clean economy that made each sentence look inevitable. The motion asked for the ordinary protections that feel extraordinary when you've never needed them. No removals, no lock changes, no further recordings. Preservation of property and evidence. Notice to the opposing party. She attached exhibits with the care of a carpenter setting joists, trust, survivorship deed, certified copy of the suspicious filing, my log, the deputy's incident number. My task was an affidavit. I am not a man who uses that word in conversation, but I can tell a sequence in the order it happened. I wrote the morning's events, named the objects touched, and stated the dates as if dates were seawalls. I signed under penalty of perjury and felt my hands stop shaking. Julia called the clerk again and secured an emergency slot for tomorrow. She drafted a short email for courtesy service to any counsel Carlos retained. If none, the notice would go to him directly. "Photographs tonight," she said, setting her phone on the table. "Doors, windows, locks, rooms as they are. Back them up to 2 places." We took pictures in a methodical loop: the front deadbolt, the studio corner, the mirrors repaired dowels, the crates in the hall, the anchor mug where it lives, the blister pack lock set still sealed on the counter. In one frame, my hand hovered in the corner, a half reflex of protection. Back at the table, Julia clipped the suspicious deed with a red tag that read, "Evidence" in capital letters. The word steadied the page. Liam came as the light drained from the river. He stopped in the doorway the way a person stops on a hospital threshold, unsure where to put his hands. I laid the certified copy on the table so he wouldn't have to stand too close to any feeling. He bent, read the date, and then the address under the notary's name. "That place is empty," he said, voice low. He took another look at the signature and shook his head once, small, like a man dislodging grit from his eye. "What happens to someone who files a thing like that?" "Court sort facts first," Julia answered. "Then consequences." He nodded. He didn't defend anyone. He didn't apologize. He went to the north window and looked out at the river until the glass turned his face into a faint double. "I'll check on Mom's tools," he said, and left before sincerity could trap him. Julia called dispatch with our new information. The deputy added a note to the incident report and told us to ring if anyone returned after dark. I photographed the porch light and the angle of the camera by the back steps, absurd images that made sense in context. We stacked the copies in a clean pile, slid the originals into the locked drawer, and set 2 pins across the motion as if weight could keep a thing from blowing away. Dusk gathered with a gray patience that made the river look metal again. The house answered tiny questions with familiar sounds, a heat register clicking, the refrigerator's soft breath, the wind fingering the chime once as if to test its pitch. I turned the blister pack lock set over in my hand and put it back on the counter where it could watch the room. Paper has its own ballast. It kept the kitchen from floating. Julia zipped her bag and checked the hearing time. We would speak to a judge at 9. I walked her to the door. The air smelled of kelp and wet rope. When she was gone, the house reclaimed its ordinary quiet. I closed the curtains, photographed them closed, and set the phone to back up to the cloud and a thumb drive both. The evidence clip glowed dull red on the table. Before bed, I touched the plastic over Isabel's last piece of clay. The surface felt cool and alive, the way the river feels when you test it with a hand. The chime clicked once, a dry shell note agreeing with itself. I turned off the lights and listened to the house find sleep around the paper that would keep it standing. The emergency calendar was a spare room with a flag, a clock, and a kind of humming quiet that makes paper sound loud. I sat at counsel table with Julia, my palms flat, the stamped copy of our motion warm from the clerk's glass. The pews were worn where elbows had learned patience. Liam took a seat behind us and folded his knit cap into a rectangle, then unfolded it, then folded it again. Across the aisle, Carlos held his jaw like a hinge he dared the day to snap. The bailiff called the case. Fluorescence paneled the ceiling like a grid you could not escape. When the judge entered, even the ventilation sighed into order. He looked like a man who knew which words mattered in a storm. The clerk asked us to state appearances. Julia stood. Carlos named himself. No attorney stood beside him. Julia's opening lasted only the time truth requires. She set her hand on the binder, then lifted one page at a time to the clerk. The trust with our names and dates, the recorded survivorship deed, the certified copy of a quitclaim executed after Isabel's death, the incident log, photographs of crates, locks, and rooms exactly as they were. We're asking to preserve the status quo, she said. My client is the surviving title holder by operation of law and trustee under a valid instrument. Attempted removals and a proposed lock change occurred within 48 hours. The judge nodded once, not to us, but to the record. This is temporary relief, he said. We're not adjudicating final title today. Tell me about urgency, Julia cited the times from the log. She did not embroider. The clerk placed stickers A through E on our exhibits, small letters that made the pile speak. The deputy took the stand briefly, badge catching a square of bench light. He swore to the incident number, to having photographed a sealed lock set and a crate at the inn, to having explained that title questions were for the court and removals should wait. He did not smile, frown, or lean. His neutrality was a useful plank. Carlos's turn came and the room shifted, not much but enough to show how words change air. He said the phrase he had tried out in my lobby 2 days before. The syllables dressed now for court. This is family property, he said. We have a community custom to keep it in the Reyes line. We're willing to let Mr. Keller remain as caretaker while we manage keys and safe until we resolve deeds. The judge lifted his eyes. What deed? He asked. The clock ticked twice. Carlos said there was a document that clarified Isabel's intent. He did not say when. Julia slid Exhibit C a half-inch forward. The quitclaim recorded 10 days ago bears an execution date after the decedent's death, she said. The notary commission number is not recognized by the Secretary of State. The listed office address is a shuttered storefront. We have requested verification. We've attached preliminary notes. The judge's eyebrows made a minimal decision. He asked the clerk to mark the page again. He looked at the date of death on the trust affidavit, then at the date on the quitclaim. He asked Carlos 3 questions that did not leave much room: whether he disputed the date of death, whether he had a valid commission number to offer, whether any witness saw Isabel sign that paper. Silence is different in court. It keeps a record of itself. Carlos asked for a continuance and mentioned hiring counsel. The judge said today we were preserving, not deciding. When my name was called, the bailiff held out a Bible, and the oath settled around my ribs like a belt. My mouth tasted like copper and coffee. I confirmed my identity, my marriage to Isabel, the fact of her death, the address of the inn, the photographs and the log I had written, the attempted lock change, the crate lid lifted and replaced. I did not add adjectives. Truth, like the river, looks stronger without them. Julia raised one last point. There was a clause in the trust regarding conduct. No disparagement of the surviving spouse, no interference with administration, context, not remedy. The judge said the court's authority was enough for today. He read the terms we sought and made them his. No removals, no lock changes, no entries without written consent or further order. No further recordings against title. Maintain the property exactly as found. Violations may be contempt, and any suspected filing fraud may be referred to the district attorney. He asked the clerk to prepare the temporary restraining order. The clerk read the order number into the microphone, the way you might read a latitude to sailors. The seal came down with a soft authority. A status date was set for 2 weeks. Service instructions were stated aloud like a recipe to be followed. I felt no triumph. Relief in court is like a seawall. Good, necessary, and not the ocean's last word. Behind us, Liam stared at Exhibit C as if ink could confess. The nephews shifted on their pew and found no job for their hands. On the back bench, a woman with a reporter's notebook wrote in a tidy slant. I recognized her from the local blog, the one that had posted candle images after the funeral. I kept my eyes on the order and my hands flat. We filed out under the murmur that follows any hearing, the clerk rustling, a bailiff clipping a clip, shoes finding the hall's waxed rhythm. In the corridor, Carlos said something about appealing to tradition, not to me, but to the air between us. The word tradition has bones. It breaks if you carry it wrong. Liam stayed back a moment. He asked not with his mouth but with his face how a paper like Exhibit C gets made. A person wanting a shortcut, I thought, plus a notary stamp that never lived and a hope the fog could hide a forgery. I told him, with as few words as a father can afford, that truth outlasts fog if you keep your lights on and your logs honest. On the steps, the reporter asked for comment. Julia declined on my behalf, simple and polite. The order speaks for itself, she said. The marine layer had lifted enough to show a sun the color of a dime. A ship blew a single note that traveled clean across the channel and shook nothing loose. Julia slid the stamped order into her folder. I touched the edge of the cardboard as if it were a rail you could lean on. The courthouse doors swung shut behind us and found their latch. We stepped into the brightness that pretends to be warmth and isn't, not yet. I held the folder the way you hold a map at the start of a hard trail and counted, without moving my lips, the things still standing. The house, the wheel, the room where clay keeps breathing under plastic, and a name on a deed that would not move. We drove home from court with the stamped order lying flat in Julia's folder like a slim, decent weight. The house met us with its regular noises, the refrigerator's quiet breath, the click of a register easing, the faint clack of shells as a draft nosed the chime and then left it alone. I put the order in the center of the kitchen table and squared its corners with my palm. Relief is not celebration. It is the room remembering the names of things. Julia opened her laptop and checked messages. A subject line sat there waiting, plain as a utility bill. A secure link from Hospital Legal, time-stamped, checksum string in the body, witness attestation attached as a PDF. She verified the hash, clicked once, and angled the screen so I could see. The room narrowed to the rectangle of light. Isabel appeared in a frame that made the pillow look too large. Her hair was pulled back, the light was careful. When she breathed, I could see the way her breath lifted the cotton and settled again. Her voice sounded the way it did when she read recipes aloud, measuring comfort into lists. She said my name first and then named her choices as if hanging a coat on a peg. Trust with 2 names because we lived one life. Survivorship because love should not require a new deed to grieve. The inn is home because coffee and river and clay had made her strong longer than medicine could. She said Carlos had asked her to return the house to the Reyes line, and she had told him that a line is not a family and a house is not a trophy. She smiled once, tired and sure, and blessed the place where Tom keeps the river off my bowls. The charge nurse's voice marked the date and the witness. Julia paused the video and opened the memorandum attached to the trust. Keepsakes listed in Isabel's tidy hand, small things meant for specific people if they behaved like family. Aprons, a book of glazes, a shell she found at seaside. The conduct clause sat beneath in plain terms. Anyone who disparaged or interfered with a surviving spouse forfeited those small gifts. It was not a weapon, it was an ethic. "We have two paths," Julia said, tapping her pen twice, then setting it down. 1. Press referral on the forged filing, pursue fees and damages. 2. Use the video and the TRO to offer a conditional settlement. Full apology, return of items, reimbursement, non-disparagement, no entry without consent, no further recordings. If they accept and the DA allows diversion, no criminal push from us. If they breach, we proceed. I looked at the order on the table and could hear the courthouse clock ticking even here. There are victories that salt the earth and boundaries that hold a line without burning the field. I pictured Liam standing between pew and aisle, cap in his hands like something he might drop or catch. I counted what mattered. Title that will not move, a house that breathes at night, Isabel's name kept clean, a livelihood that pays the light bill. "Measured," I said. The word felt like a plank laid across water. Liam knocked once and came in without looking around. I pointed to the chair opposite the screen. He stood behind it and watched his mother say that family is something you practice, not something you announce. Shame changed his posture first, then it left room for clarity. "What do I need to sign?" he asked, voice low enough to respect the room. Julia dictated while I wrote in a hand the judge would be able to read. Apology from Carlos to me and to Anna, not performative but signed. Immediate return of anything removed, reimbursement of locksmith copies, and reasonable attorney time to date. Non-disparagement and non-interference, no entry, no lock changes, no recordings without my written consent or a court order. No filings against title. If breached, all remedies reserved, including immediate DEA referral. One more line for Liam, an independent acknowledgement that he supports my authority over the inn and will refrain from any adverse act, plus a statement of intent to train later if offered. Julia phoned the deputy and asked for the incident file to note the suspicious deed and our intent to propose civil terms. She made clear that charging is the state's decision. The deputy added the note and read back the number like a taut line. She called the DA's intake desk next, left a short memo with the order number, flagged the video and the forged notary facts, said we were attempting resolution without prejudice to prosecution. We printed the term sheet. Paper slid from the machine with its warm carbon smell. Liam signed his acknowledgement with a hand that shook, then steadied after the T in his last name. He stayed to label exhibits, a service that felt like penance. Red tags where they belonged, tabs aligned with the summary, a neat stack that made the table look more like a brain than a battlefield. He asked if I needed the porch bulb replaced. I said yes, and he brought a step stool without leaving the room as if the light itself might keep us from drifting. Julia emailed the offer to Carlos and to the address he had used on his filings, copy to any counsel once they surfaced. She set a deadline 2 days before the preliminary injunction hearing. Her cover note was courteous and flat. Court order in effect. This preserves dignity and resources. Breach restores our options. The house calmed under the next hour as if the documents had weight the walls could understand. I returned the stamped order to the center and laid the red evidence clip on the suspicious deed, then put a glass paperweight over both, a small mercy that made the stack look finished for the night. "Photographs," Julia reminded gently, and I nodded. The camera already remembered the angles from yesterday. When she left, dusk had gathered the river into a long piece of metal again. Liam lingered at the door, cap in his hand, the old boy and the not-yet father in the same bones. "I'll be back in the morning," he said, and this time the sentence held. I went to the wheel and lifted the plastic on Isabel's last piece. The clay had kept its cool. The collar waited for a hand to shape it smaller. I misted the surface and watched the sheen bloom, then soften. The shell chime answered a night draft with one dry syllable. Measured, I told the room again and set the spray bottle down where she always put it, nozzle turned to off. A boundary with teeth and a door that opens when someone knocks. This is as much justice as a house can hold and still be a home. The morning arrived as a chorus of small sounds, printer warming, phone trilling, gulls arguing somewhere past the pilings. I woke to pings I hadn't asked for and a link I didn't open until the kettle clicked off. Columbia Current had posted blood versus paper on the river. The headline looked larger than our house deserves. I printed the page for the file, stamped the time in the incident log, and let the screen go dark. If a story is going to live, let it live on paper where dates hold. In the lobby, the certified copy packet lay under a glass paperweight like a pressed leaf. The red evidence clip had lost its heat. It was only red now. Liam wiped the counter and checked the key hooks without being asked. We photographed locks and doors the way hikers take first light pictures of trailheads, proof of where we started. I brewed coffee and put Isabel's anchor mug back on the rack. When the phone rang, Liam answered with the soft competence of a man who has decided to do a thing right. The town was louder than the house. The neighborhood group had pinned a summary asking neighbors to keep opinions off porches. Former guests posted photos from workshops, hands dusty with clay, captions remembering Isabel warming tea lights during a windstorm, her habit of carrying one extra shawl for anyone who forgot. Someone quoted the order number correctly. I did not comment. The house had work. The deputy stopped by after 9, hat under his arm, radio whispering. He glanced at the article I'd printed and set it aside like a coaster. "We've got your returns form here," he said, sliding it across. He wrote the incident addendum number and underlined it once. His presence was a thermostat. It took the room down a degree. By 10, the first return arrived. The Reyes nephews stepped out of a pickup in daylight, posture smaller than it had been in shadow. They opened the bed and lifted a crate of unfired pieces with the hush of men carrying eggs. I pointed to the spot by the north window. The deputy watched, made a note, initialed the form. I photographed each side of the crate, the plastic still taped where I had taped it, the corner scuffed, the contents breathing cool like sleep. The sealed lock set appeared next from a paper bag, still in blister, the brass obedient in morning light. I recorded its brand, serial, and time. Inventory has the mercy of math. They left in a line without conversation. I logged their plates because the form asked politely for them, not because I thought I'd forget. Liam stood on the ladder while I guided the antique mirror back onto its screws. My thumb found the dowel repair I had made last winter and felt it hold. Balance returned in half seconds. The lift, the catch, the warm click when wood meets wood and agrees. On the floor, the deputy wrote a line, and I thought of how many small official lines keep a town from fraying. Around noon, Anna came in with her shawl wrapped tight in a pouch the size of a palm. She looked at the crate and then at the mirror as if it had spoken to her, and placed a folded card on the counter. Inside it, in thin, careful script, was a sentence short as weather. "I did not ask for this." She slid the velvet pouch across. Inside lay the shell Isabel found at Seaside the first spring we were married. It wasn't a return, it was a choosing. She left before anyone could turn it into a scene. An email from Carlos arrived near the same time, an attempt at posture inside a paragraph. He used phrases like "without admission" and "family sensitivities," and then, in plainer words, said he would apologize in writing, return everything, and reimburse reasonable costs if our public statement remained strictly neutral and we did not push criminal. Julia replied with the same term sheet we had already sent, attached a joint statement template, court-ordered preservation, family cooperating, and restated the deadline 2 days before the injunction hearing. She copied the incident number into the footer like a keel. Early afternoon, Columbia Current posted an update that the deputy had observed a return. The comments cooled a few degrees. A sharp sentence about forged filings drew a moderator's reminder about libel, and the thread stepped back to photographs and memories. Isabel at her wheel, a child grinning with a lopsided bowl, someone's dog asleep under the workshop table. Community is a tide. When it comes in gentle, you realize how close you were to scraping bottom. Another load came late, a banker's box with glazed notebooks, corners taped, a chipped bowl on top with a sticky note that read, "Sorry." I set the bowl aside after a quick photograph. Apology, when it fits inside pottery, is at least honest about what breaks. Liam carried the notebooks to Isabel's corner, placed them by the wheel, and stood there longer than he needed to. He had begun a list in his head of things that needed doing: fix the porch bulb, oil the door hinge, reorder filters, and the list was changing him faster than regret could. By late day, the phone had stopped chiming. I sat with the order under glass and recognized a shape I hadn't felt in weeks. Not victory, not even peace, just a sound lowered to human scale. Fatigue walked in with its bill. I paid by standing up, stretching, and making another pot of coffee so the house would smell like us when dusk drifted in. The shell chime gave one mild syllable and fell quiet. Near evening, the blogger knocked, a courtesy most don't extend when clicks are involved. She asked for comment. I pointed to the joint statement Julia had drafted and to the deputy's log. The order speaks for itself, I said, keeping voice and hands at the level of chairs and doorknobs. She nodded, made a note, and left the porch the way good weather leaves. Inside, I filed the printed post behind the incident log, then wrote the day. Returns received, serials logged, mirror rehung, notebooks back, Anna's card and shell placed with keepsakes. Liam rehooked the keys in the order Isabel preferred, wiped the counter with patient circles, and set the close sign for the night as if it were always his job. Work forgives before words do. I stood at the north window until the river forgot to shine and settled into metal. The house held its weight the way a ship sits down into water after a hard port. We had documented consequences, not performed them, and the difference felt like a roof. Tomorrow would ask for plans, not defenses. I lifted the anchor mug, rinsed it, and set it upside down to dry. Morning began with a clearing as if the house had exhaled sometime in the night and left the air ready for names again. I cleared the kitchen table and filed what belonged to history: certified copies, return receipts, the deputy's addendum. The red evidence clip moved from the center to an archive sleeve, bright but quiet, like a buoy seen from shore. In the incident log, I wrote a single line at the top of a fresh page: build forward. A courier knocked at 9:30 and handed over a rigid envelope. Inside were 2 apology letters, one to me, one addressed to Anna, and a check that listed locksmith, copies, and the attorney time to date. The tone was stiff where it could have been warm, but compliance has its own temperature. I photographed the unopened envelopes, then the letters themselves, then the check with the amount legible. I logged each image number with the calm of a bookkeeper who only believes in columns. On speaker, Julia confirmed receipt of our scans and said she would file a notice of settlement terms that left the private parts private and the public parts useful. TRO remains in force, she added, then outlined the conversion path to a stipulated order: no entry without consent, no lock changes, no recordings, no interference. I initialed the margin by each term as if signing a pact with the house. She calendared the 2-week status and sent over the neutral joint statement for posting. I called the deputy and read the check amount into the line where it belonged. He added it to the incident file, a civic ledger built out of ordinary disclaimers over a series of days. When I hung up, the kitchen sounded like itself again, refrigerator settling, wind fingering the chime into a single syllable, pipes conducting a small sermon about heat. Transparency was next. I drafted a page for the inn's website and titled it Transparency and Community. Two nouns that don't sing but harmonize if you let them. The text was plain. The court ordered preservation. Family is cooperating. An independent review of our books will occur. We will post a brief assurance letter for vendors and neighbors when it's done. I printed a copy and slipped it behind a tab labeled the same name, then wondered if Isabel would have approved the font. I chose a serif. The page needed soft edges. The auditor I had asked Julia to recommend answered on the second ring. We set an appointment for next week and agreed on scope. Last 18 months. Operating accounts and invoices, nothing exotic. Liam listened from the doorway and, without being prompted, began to sort receipts into stacks. Linen service, perishables, maintenance, merchant fees. His shoulders lowered as the piles grew, a man learning that paper can hold weight if you stack it true. Governance followed transparency like a heel follows a toe. I wrote a one-page access policy and posted a copy behind the desk. Entries by appointment, every visit logged, keys enumerated and stored. No changes to locks without council notice, cameras to remain aimed at doors rather than faces. Policy sounds cold until you see how it protects warmth. It sets a doorway in the right wall. Julia and I reviewed trust amendments over the phone after lunch. Successor trustee, flow in case of accident. An explicit line dedicating a portion of any eventual sale to the scholarship we intended to start in Isabel's name. A tightening of the conduct guidance so future arguments have smaller rooms to echo in. Drafts would be ready to sign tomorrow. She would bring a notary who had a commission number you could find in a book. I opened a new folder and wrote Isabel Reyes Pottery Scholarship on the tab. The plan was simple. $1,000 per semester. Priority for local seniors heading to community college ceramics. Funding to come from an auction of Isabel's last kiln batch and a small match from the inn. I placed the seaside shell Anna had returned on top of the folder, a weight and a blessing both. It clicked softly against the paper and stayed. Then I printed the training map for Liam, 4 quarters across a year, front desk and guest care, housekeeping and maintenance, vendors and accounting basics, marketing and programming. Each block carried a skills checklist and a date for a written evaluation. At the bottom, in a line that would have made Isabel clap, I typed, fall, stay, and throw. Weekend. His idea that had turned strangers into students and students into friends. He read the page twice and signed underneath his name. I'll earn it, he said, and the sentence sat correctly in the room. We posted the joint statement, no adjectives, just facts. I replied to 2 emails from regulars with the link and a note of thanks. I let every temptation to explain pass through like weather. The house required maintenance, not opinion. Anna stopped by in the late afternoon with a small framed photo of Isabel as a teenager, glaze up to her wrists, grin invisible under concentration. She always leaned in, Anna said, the only sentence she allowed herself. I placed the photo on the keepsake shelf beside the shell in the program from our opening night. The shelf looked like it remembered how to hold beginnings. Evening settled early, as it does when the river turns pewter and the clouds decide to stay low. I filed the apology letters behind the settlement tab and slid the reimbursement check into a bank pouch, labeled with the date. Liam scanned invoices until the machine warmed the corner of the desk. I pinned the training map where Isabel used to tape her kiln schedules, a bright rectangle that made the wall look forward instead of back. Before closing, I misted the last piece on the wheel and rotated it a quarter turn the way she had taught me, aligning the seam with a tiny nick in the bat so future me would know where grace had started. In the log, I wrote, systems in place. Tomorrow. Steady work. Then I turned off the lamp above the table and let the house translate silence back into safety. The chime answered once. No omen, only air. 2 weeks after the hearing, the courthouse looked smaller, as if the building had exhaled the same way the inn had. The status calendar moved quickly. We sat on a wooden pew that remembered 1,000 small cases and a few large ones. Julia held a thin folder. I held nothing at all, which felt correct. When our matter was called, she rose and handed the clerk a document the color of certainty. The judge read just enough to make the record breathe. A stamp fell with a soft authority I recognized from clear weather ship horns. The stipulated order had replaced the TRO, not a victory march so much as a keel laid straight. The terms were the ones that let a house sleep. No entry without consent, no lock changes, no filings against title, non-disparagement, costs tendered, returns complete. Any future dispute to mediation before court. The clerk noted receipt of Carlos's apology and reimbursement with the same tone he used for room numbers and dates. Nothing was performed aloud. The line went into the minutes, and the minutes became civic memory. I felt the room lower its voice a notch and understood that relief sounds like that. In the hallway, Julia summarized next steps in 2 tidy sentences. Trust amendments tomorrow with a notary who exists in books. Auditor next week for the assurance letter. Her hand on the folder signaled conclusion rather than suspense. We shook once, and I walked out lighter in the same clothes I had walked in. Back at the inn, Liam flipped the open sign with a motion that did not look ceremonial. We wiped counters until wood showed its grain. A small placard at the desk offered a link to the neutral joint statement. The phone rang and he took 2 inquiries for the fall weekend workshop he had named Stay and Throw. He set deposits, confirmed dates, and wrote clear notes. Competence does not draw a crowd, it draws breath. Before lunch, I reviewed his first quarter checklist. Front desk tasks, guest care, incident logging, vendor calls, inventory. The boxes wore his initials in a hand that had steadied these last weeks. I signed the evaluation and wrote a line about composure and follow-through. He signed for quarter 2 and wrote housekeeping and maintenance with the focus of a man who has learned that repair is a way of speaking to a house. Guests returned without fanfare. A retired birder couple checked in and left a tiny pine cone from a trail they love. A thing that made the front desk smell briefly of shade. A woman who once took Isabel's class brought a jar of blackberry jam and asked if we still kept an extra shawl near the door. We do. The lobby sounded like a polite harbor again, chairs settling, kettle clicking, keys tapping the hook in the order Isabel liked. I posted the scholarship page and printed a flyer for the counter. The seaside shell Anna had brought sat on the folder, a small tide holding the papers down. I wrote the auction date for Isabel's last kiln batch on a sticky note and stuck it to the edge like a promise that knows the difference between hope and calendar. Anna arrived quietly, read the flyer, and rested 2 fingers on the shell, a gesture that felt like a ribbon cut without scissors. She handed me a narrow slip of paper with a recipe note in Isabel's handwriting. Lower heat, longer patience. I slid it under the frame of a photograph that shows a teenage Isabel up to her wrists in glaze. We did not discuss Carlos. We discussed the way October smells at the river and the way stoneware holds light when you lift it at dusk. Some bridges do not need planks, only the refusal to burn. Housekeeping became a form of healing. Liam changed the porch bulb, oiled the hinge that had been singing, and updated the events page on the website. I adjusted the cameras a few degrees to frame doors, not faces. The new access policy took its first signature from a vendor who dropped by with filters and a grin. Culture is only policy practiced long enough that no one bothers to call it policy. In the afternoon, the auditor confirmed her appointment. I slid the stipulated order into the binder's front sleeve and moved the TRO behind it, a visible timeline of how paper held. The binder had begun to wear at the tabs in a way that made it look like a tool rather than a trophy. I set it down and listened to the room agree. Toward evening, the phone rang twice more for the workshop. Liam took both calls and wrote both names without leaving smudges on the ledger. He asked if I wanted him to draft a welcome email template. I nodded. Templates are how kindness stays consistent when people get tired. I totaled the day on a notepad. 2 bookings, 2 prepayments, 1 scholarship page viewed 37 times, 1 vendor signature on the access sheet, 1 line in the minutes of a court that will forget my name and remember the order number. I thanked Julia in a short email and closed the screen because gratitude has better weight on paper and in action. I thanked Liam by handing him the key to the supply closet and a list of tomorrow's tasks, the ordinary inheritance of anyone who wants a place to stand. When the light went pewter, I stood at the keepsake shelf and counted what stands. The shell, the photo, the recipe note, the binder that replaced panic with process, the training map with quarter 1 checked and quarter 2 beginning. None of it heroic, all of it shelter. At the wheel, I misted Isabel's last piece and rotated it to the tiny nick she used as a guide. The clay held cool, as if patient. The shell chime answered the night air with 2 small notes, not a warning and not a celebration, only the sound a house makes when it knows its name. I wrote in the log, order entered, in open, first quarter done. We begin. Then I turned off the lamp and let the room take it from there. In the end, what lasts is quieter than victory. Not the noise of doors slammed or voices raised, but the steady click of a lock that won't be changed without consent, the rustle of papers filed in the right order, the lamp switched off by a hand that knows its duty. Justice here wasn't a spectacle, it was preservation. Mercy wasn't softness, it was a boundary with teeth. And family, if it means anything at all, is not a slogan or a bloodline, but the work repeated every day, logs kept, keys returned, promises honored when no one is watching. We learned that stewardship outbuilds ownership. A house is not a trophy, it is a trust. Process is not cold, it is the scaffolding that lets love breathe after the storm. Paperwork, calendars, and community eyes, the unromantic trio, turn grief into a craft and anger into a checklist. Revenge may delight the moment, but order sustains the years. Choose the path that records instead of performs, that repairs instead of scorches, that leaves a doorway open for anyone willing to knock with clean hands. If this story met you where you live, in a decision, a boundary, a quiet act of care, carry that forward. Start the document you've postponed. Tell the truth without theater. Practice family as a verb. Let your house, whatever shape it takes, learn to hold again. Thank you for spending this time with us. We'd love to hear what resonated. The moment a choice became clear, the line that changed your view, or the lesson you'll keep. Share your thoughts in the comments so others can learn from your perspective. And if this kind of storytelling matters to you, please subscribe and turn on notifications. It helps this community grow and ensures you won't miss the next chapter we build together.